to go to work and first be able to teach, which was my love, but then, because you learn from your students, but then to learn from other faculty, usually, like in San Luis Obispo, you're isolated from other faculty and everybody has their turf. And John set it up so that there was no hierarchy and no turf. We were here to learn from each other.
And you co-taught, right?
Yeah.
For me, my department couldn't understand what I was doing or why. And I had experience in San Luis Obispo co-teaching a course in human values and technology, where one faculty had to be from the humanities and one faculty had to be from the technology, from engineering. And so that was a wonderful experience. So I was all ready to work with these strange people like agriculture,
with Victor
and
Ron.
biology people, and John, the landscape architects. So it was a real neat experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. And we did co-teach.
We did.
A couple of courses.
In regenerative studies. We always felt, and this is very strange in this huge state system, that the five of us, faculty in the beginning, kind of this team, had the ultimate say in everything to do with the center until the students came, and then they would have a big say too. But we never worried about the administration. And that was a gift. That was really a gift. And the fact the center was across the street on the edge of landfill that nobody wanted to look at. And so no one kind of knew what was going on. And I don't know, I'm sure John protected that too, so that we could be as creative as we wanted to. We didn't have to think, well, what's so-and-so in housing going to say about the fact we're choosing the students? This was typical of John. He said to me, Sharon, I want you to go meet with the head of housing and just let him know what we're doing. And I said, okay. So I did, and he was just wonderful. He said, that takes the worry off of me. I didn't even know what you guys were up to, but that's fine. Go ahead and choose the students. So we could always say to other higher up bosses, or John could, oh yes, we're coordinated with housing.
There were probably 20 of those types of collectors made, and this was an experimental version, and we were able to convince, it was paid for by Sandia, the whole project, by the Department of Energy, and we were able to convince them to put one of their test units at Cal Poly at the moment, and the students then would run it. It was an experiment. Yeah. So engineers do a lot of experiments, things that are just tested for a little bit and they don't work right or they need to be improved. So you throw it away and go to the next one. We had probably 10 different types of solar collectors up there in the solar park that the students would come up and run tests on every week. And,
so they had a place to sit and terminals, and they had, and they knew that some of this was going to the Department of Energy. So it gave it a real nice reality, not just for the Center for Regenerative Studies. Yeah, it's really nice. I did a class in human behavior and regenerative studies, and to do that, it was wonderful. They had to keep track of and observe all kinds of things at the center. For example, the recycle program and as far as trash, the water waste or whatever. They had to keep track of energy, which they could, how much electricity was being used. And then they had to look at behavior and where there were problems. And I taught them how to keep track, and we got a lot of interesting data, and we graph it and chart it. This was sort of before computers, but They got a lot of interesting data. And the 2 or 3 things hit at first. And one was, there were only 18 students, and the build out of the center was going to be 3 times that much, but that wasn't where it was, or eventually where it was going. So there was too much work, especially in the early days. I mean, they were all taking a full course load on campus, and they had to go to campus too. So just planting all those fruit trees, or having a vegetable garden, or even chickens and gathering the eggs or feeding them. They kept track of hours and of labor, and it's hard to be a farmer. And none of the students had any experience, even with their grandma or whatever, having a vegetable garden. And so from my work with John previous, we both predicted that labor was going to be an issue, and it was. And he got a graduate student, Steve, to kind of oversee some of that heavy work. And luckily, Kubota donated a tractor to the center, and that was everybody's joy for a while. Then the second thing that was difficult was the issues around food, because they fixed it all communally and ate together. And, very soon became obvious, because it wasn't even planted yet, they couldn't grow all their own food. But they tried to get things organically. And within the first few weeks, out of the 18 students, all but 2 turned vegetarian, and some of those vegan. And so there was this group of avid vegetarians, and then a couple guys who were not. And so we had to be careful about what was going on with those dynamics. And and who was doing the dishes, and who cleaned up, and they didn't clean up the way it should have been. But they studied it, and they weren't afraid to study it, and they weren't afraid to ask questions. And mostly, I think the thing I remember about the students is they were so dedicated. Sometimes so dedicated it got in the way, because you kind of lose your sense of humor if you think you're finally living gently on the earth and no one else is. Well, you've got to be careful of that too. But
and there were pigs, right?
Oh yeah, and they named the 2 pigs after the 2 students who were not vegetarian. And they told John immediately, "We'll never eat Chad," and whoever the other student was. And so John said, I remember he said to me, "Can't you do something about that?" And I said, "No, John, they're vegetarians. They're not going to eat those pigs, but that's part of our system." I said, "Well, they're willing for the poop to go into the ponds to feed the tilapia, but they're not going to have the pigs go to be slaughtered and eat them." So they went to a petting zoo. But they wouldn't eat the chickens, but they did eat the eggs. Mm-hmm. Some of them did, not all. Mm-hmm. That was not predicted. Mm-hmm. It really wasn't. But all of it was, the goal was so right. And for the time, in 1990, early 1990s, regenerative design, or even sustainability, or all that was not big. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, it's, we're talking about the environment all the time.
You guys were there in the very beginning. And you're talking about a time where it functioned a certain way, and then it started to change a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how or why it changed, or what your experience was, because you were there, for a few years?
Well, counting setting it up, and the planning, and developing all the curriculum and the courses, and getting that all approved by the academic senate, and then getting the students and getting them started. It was probably 5 to 7 years.
And when did you?
The one thing that affected the program the most, I think, was when people started when administration
That's right.
people started understanding what we were doing over there, because initially nobody had any concept.
No, we were called hippies on the hill.
But the more they understood, the more they felt like the system, that our program had to fit into the rest of the academic system. And I know in lots of discussions with John, we all agreed that we have to be different, that the system, the current system is part of the problem, or it's a result of the problem. The basic regenerative or lack of sustainability problems. And the more that people learned about what we were doing, the more they felt like, well, it has to fit into this slot. No, it has to fit into this slot. And we were trying to be interdisciplinary. We were trying to be different.
Slotless.
That's true.
And experimental.
And non-hierarchical. And the university is a huge hierarchy.
And so that fitting, once people found out what we were trying to do, especially administration, because it's their job to administrate. And that means tell you what you should do and shouldn't do.
And the administration changed around that?
It's always changing.
It's changing all the time. So that must have meant a lot of shifting.
Because people came in who had no idea what was going on, and some places were interested in visiting around the country, and sometimes foreign, and so the administration felt like they really needed to know what was going on, and that made a different pressure. So the center sited right on that landfill, and we could look out and see those trash trucks, like almost like a train going with trash to that landfill. That was very sobering view. And none of the planting had grown up on that hillside. So you could see what was happening, and they were living right on it, and you could smell it sometimes.
What happened to that?
It's closed.
It's closed.
Yeah, they capped it into the 90s.
Okay.
And got someplace else to take the trash. But I didn't expect that to be such a powerful reminder to the students about recycling.
But all of those things take outside support. And students don't have money, faculty don't have money, the university doesn't have money. They're financially pressed to make money on their facilities. They were when we were going to build a golf course on some of their land just so they could make money for the university system. But something to reduce the labor, I think.
Yes, I agree. No, after we left, there was a group, I think from Japan, who came that were interested in the regenerative agriculture part of it, and some of them worked there for a year.
Yeah, were they linked to Shunji
Yes, exactly.
Yes, my dad.
He kind of set that up, and that was a big help. So that kind of thing, and they wanted to come because they wanted to study that and different climate, and so those kinds of things are super, super helpful. Students and faculty come up and visit because, to me, the center is a very magical place, and the architecture, John's architecture, is just regenerative design. It shows you can be absolutely beautiful. And I would guess now, we haven't been back for years, but with everything grown.
I'll show you pictures.
Oh my gosh, I bet it's just beautiful. And so when people see that, they think, wow, regenerative design doesn't have to be a sand pit with just one cactus in the middle. It's, it's really, really beautiful. And I think that image needs to be given to the campus. And I would guess very few people who work on the main campus have ever been up there or ever planned to go up there. So there have to be reasons and transportation and ways to have those connections. And we had open house once or twice, but they weren't terribly successful. So I'm not sure how that happens, but it does need to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like somehow the horses, the Arab raising gets students, and when a foal is born, they do the flags that they for the female and blue for the male. I don't know if they still do it, but everyone on campus knew when a baby was born, and you could go down there and see them, cavorting around eventually in the yards and in the corrals. And that gave people a connection to the horses and the roots of Cal Poly. There's nothing like that at the center. There's no flag flying when a certain crop is in.
Yeah.
Or,
Oh, that's a lovely idea. Wouldn't that be a lovely idea?
I think so. I don't know. Any way you can do it that is positive that people can relate to. Like if there's a huge field of artichokes, Southern California people can relate to artichokes, so come on up and get a free one. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
The concept of regenerative design, regenerative programs is catching on, like you mentioned. And one place is here in Santa Fe. We have what the name of it is, the Santa Fe Institute, which was started by Marie Gell-Mann, the Nobel Prize winner from Caltech. And they attract high-level academics from all over the world for various programs. And one of the members of the Institute, Jeffrey West, recently wrote a book called Scale.
Yeah,
which
it sounds like your dad.
Has to do with how things can scale up in size or scale down in size or cannot. But a lot of what he is interested in is the interdisciplinary aspects of science. I mean, they're basically, many of them are nuclear physicists, but they're also interested in the commonality between biology, for example, and growth and physics. And it's amazing how I think this whole idea of understanding the interconnectivity between the disciplines is important and maybe what will save us from a lot of failures. And I was really impressed with the talks every so often put on by the Santa Fe Institute.
And they're free, and they're in our lovely Lensick Theater once a month, and they're packed.
Do they know about the center at all?
I don't know.
Do they know the lineage of those ideas?
I don't know.
I doubt it. I really doubt it. When we first retired and came here, when we were still teaching, and the Institute was just starting, I sent a packet of stuff to them, but I never heard back. But they were just starting, so it's understandable. But no.
It's interesting. I think that's one of the things with this exhibition that I'm hoping to help create some of these connections, because, the same way interdisciplinariness is so important, so is a sharing of this information. This interdisciplinary organization and this interdisciplinary organization need to know about each other, because that's another form of connection and interdisciplinariness. And I think, that's one of the things that I'm sort of realizing is all of the stuff that was being done with the regenerative studies really early on is so connected to what's being done now, but I'm not sure they all know about each other, or, I think sometimes they do, and sometimes the link is direct, but sometimes it's been a long time. And in some ways, as much as the center wanted to connect outside of itself, I still don't think it's as well known.
No, I don't either. And there is the potential, being an academic setting, of all kinds of presentations happening all over the world. And your dad was masterful at that. he made so many presentations in so many places. And we get visitors from these places wanting to see, what was going on from the very beginning. Yeah. So.
I always felt, I was an outsider. I was in engineering. Engineers are completely outside of a lot of things, but the rest of the university. But I always felt that John talked to me as an equal. He didn't imply that his knowledge of architecture or landscape architecture or anything that he'd studied was any better than what I had learned. And he was always trying to learn from me. I probably didn't try to learn enough from him.
Oh, you did.
But I did. But I could have tried harder, I guess.
Well, we all say that, yeah.
But, it was just one of those relationships, synergistic, and somehow it just clicked.